So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back again at day 5 and the final session of Behavioral Design Week. I hope that that most of you enjoyed most of the sessions we did before. We actually had a great session this morning as well with Calvin, famous Dutch influencer. My name is Tom de Bruyne. For those of you who tune in for the first time, I'm co-founder of SUE Behavioural Design Academy, and the new venture that recently launched, SUE and the Alchemists. And it's my honor to welcome you again and to introduce our next speaker. So Behavioral Design Week, as I said a couple of times, is all about deconstructing the theory and the practice of influence. We really want to learn from radically different people in the field on how the application of behavioral science could, improve the way we think about marketing, branding, product development, engaging with audiences, etc., etc. And I think we've seen a brilliant, very different kind of mix in the previous week, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I kind of think that and hope that we save the best for last, not wanting to put too much pressure on your shoulder, Baptiste. But it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Baptiste Tougeron from Google. I met Baptiste I think a year ago when he was head of a Google data science a hackathon project somewhere in the south of Spain, and since then we met regularly. He is as fascinated as we are about the intersection between data science and behavioral science, and he's part of a behavioral science and data science council at an international trade organization called ICOM, where I'm also part of that council. And I asked him, I think a couple of months ago, I said, look, Baptiste, we are having Behavioral Design Week, and I heard that he is a trained recruiter at Google, which means that that Google has designed this completely fascinating behavioral science-based hiring process. So they studied everything until the smallest detail to figure out how they could make better rational choices in hiring. And he is one of the people who's trained in it. And I said, Baptiste, can you talk about that at Behavioral Design Week? And he said, no, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that, but I think I might have something better. Have a look at this paper. And he sent me the paper that he's going to talk about today. And when I read this paper, I thought, holy shit, this is really, really interesting stuff. So without telling much what this paper and what this story is going to be, because I have a little bit the tradition of the kind of ruining people's story before, I will give the floor to Baptiste Tougeron. Please, Baptiste.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Hi, everybody. So yes, my name is Baptiste, and I'm research manager for Southern Europe at Google since 4 years now. And I have to say, I'm very happy to be here with you today. And I want to give a special thanks to Tom for the invitation, obviously. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation, and I'll meet expectations. Just before starting, if you have any question during the presentation, we try to answer them at the end of the presentation, if that's okay, but you can do them on the chat, and then Julia will share that with me afterwards, so we can keep the flow of the presentation, right? All right, so let's start. So first, short introduction. Obviously, for everybody, the pandemic has been a marathon of adjustment for people and businesses around the world. And we had to accept change, and we had to adapt and pivot to a new normal, sometimes slowly, sometimes faster than we expected. And we made choices that turned into new habits. And 2020 was clearly a year unlike any other. And more than ever, marketers need to understand what behavioral shifts are poised to persist. So when we focus on the consumer behavior evolution, we can easily identify that between the purchase trigger and actually making the purchase itself, today's consumer is presented with a vast amount of information and choices across a complex web of touchpoints like search engines, review sites, social media, comparison sites, video, and etc. So if we were to sketch that on a piece of paper, you might end up with something like this, what you see on screen. We call this the messy middle. I call it the big spaghetti plate. And well, the question is all of this behavior being fully captured by our often siloed brand and performance marketing practices? And one of the biggest challenges for brands is ensuring that customers, both existing and new, don't fall through the gaps in this complex space. And that's a space where, as our research would show you, customers are won or lost. And to do that, behavior in the messy middle needs to be decoded. But decoding that behavior is a challenge. So we could easily use the good old purchase funnel, not the latest marketing model, but still widely referenced, and can still be a useful tool for planning. But anyone who's ever heard any or read any behavioral science book, or anyone who can actually relate the spaghetti-like mess on the previous slide, knows that purchase decision making doesn't follow this linear process. It's much more complex than this, and it's not always done consciously, and it is subject to behavioral biases. So just to give you a little bit of background, some of the behavioral scientists we have been studying the science of human decision for decades. And to address the challenge of understanding how shoppers make decisions in the messy middle, we partnered with an amazing team from the behavioral architects. That's a behavioral science specialist that are based in UK. And we actually did something together. We did three big things. The first one is that we've put a lot of emphasis on observation, the shopping journey. So we used screen and audio recordings to capture hundreds of hours of shoppers making purchase decisions. And then we analyzed this through the lens of behavioral science, which was quite new for us, in order to update our understanding of decision-making behavior. But this was not enough. So we went a little bit further through literature review. Over the last 15 years or so, behavioral scientists have identified about 300 principles that underpin human behaviors. So we conducted an exhaustive literature review of the behavioral science literature to identify 6 cognitive biases from that list of 300 that we feel are most relevant to decision-making in the messy middle. And then the last step, which was crucial to fully understand what was happening in that messy middle, is that we've run some simulations to test and validate those biases at scale. We created a simulated purchases environment. We picked out a range of products that represent varying degrees of purchase decision complexity and enjoyment. And then we recruited about 1,000 in-market shoppers for each of those products. They each completed like around 10 simulated purchases scenarios. And this really allowed us to simulate the transfer of preference from one brand to another using different combination of 6 selected biases. And you will see after that the results of the simulation on one specific category. So the first job we had to untangle this mess was that. So based on our observation of shopping and behavior and the literature review, we have updated our model of consumer decision making. It's an evolution of models you may have seen before, but there are some important updates that we feel are essential to understanding modern consumer decision making. So we're going to walk you through it step by step, all right? So firstly, all decisions are made against a background of exposure. Not an entirely new concept, you know. This would include what we typically refer to as brand awareness. We know what it is, but exposure is actually more than that. In addition to that TV campaign we have in mind. And the really important distinction here is that unlike awareness that sits on top of the purchase funnel, exposure is always on. it's always changing and it's always influencing decision-making right the way through the process. So it's not a stage of the process, it's actually the backdrop and the column of the entire process. So at some moment, a purchase is triggered. At this point, the shopper moves from a passive state into an active state of purchase decision-making. It could be a typical moment where you realize that you have a big hole in your shoes and you say, okay, I need a new pair of shoes. That's simply as this. And then eventually, and hopefully, there's a purchase at the end. But then there's a real messy bit. All the activity that happens in between the trigger and the purchase itself. And that's, again, this spaghetti plate I've talked about previously, and that's the messy middle. That's what we call the messy middle. So we wanted to organize that a little bit, right? So we've taken all the behaviors in the messy middle, whatever it is and wherever it happens, and we codified it into one of the two mental modes that we had in mind, which was exploration and evaluation. So whatever the shopper is doing in between trigger and purchase, and whether or not they're doing it consciously, they are doing one of those two things, exploring or evaluating. These two tasks can happen either simultaneously or sequentially, but according to science, there are two distinct mental processes with separate reward structure. Exploration mode is an expansive exercise. And here we usually add brands to our consideration sets. That's where you have like this big bucket or a lot of like, Chrome, different sheets where you are scoping and scanning everything related to what you're looking for on the web and what you're trying to buy. And then you have the evaluation mode that is a more reductive exercise in the mode where you narrow down our options. But because of the sheer volume of information and choices available and the speed and ease at which we acquire it, we are encouraged, compelled, and sometimes for more complex purchases, even obliged to go back into exploration mode when which generates new options that then in turn need to be evaluated, creating this loop. And that's also very conscious that we've done also this design. It's almost infinite sometimes, and you can be lost in the matrix trying to search for a product and never finding the right one. So depending on who you are and what you're shopping for, that can be fun. But from a marketing perspective, this is not that fun, and it's certainly not efficient. So how do we get our customers from trigger to purchase as efficiently as possible? And now this happens outside of the messy middle, and we haven't got time to cover this in any real detail today, but it's important to mention that once the purchase is made, there will be some post-purchase experience that we feed back into exposure. That will feed back into exposure. The nature of the experience and whether or not it was possible will form a key part of exposure when the purchase is next triggered, and possibly even the frequency of that trigger, of if in fact it's triggered again at all. So, for example, you have the slow landing pages, poor site speed, clunky user experience. All of these things hinder exploration and evaluation. If the experience is negative, customer will evaluate you negatively and will go and explore somewhere else. For example, competitor website, obviously. So hugely important, but not something we'll address today. And I will talk to you about the next step that we are actually now exploring that step. So there we have it. That's our brand new model where we've managed to bring some order to the chaos. And this updated model of consumer decision-making, we think it's quite accurate and quite close to the reality. But obviously, it could evaluate through time. Then what's important for the messy middle, it's how we've codified the behaviors. And that's the important piece of that research. Because now we need to know how shoppers process all that information and the choice as they explore and evaluate in the messy middle. And this is where we have those 6 cognitive biases that we've identified in our literature review before. So before we look at those, we need to establish a couple of boundaries, obviously, because the research is not intended to guide brand strategies. That's why you have it, on the top of the slide, because the careful crafting of the brand and the awareness of that brand up until the purchase is triggered, and we've not covered it in that research. And that's the same thing for the pricing strategy. Like branding, pricing, not so easily change either. It's also outside of our remit. And in the purchase simulation that follow, we control for price by telling participants that they will pay the expected market value for a product. So we just skip those pieces to concentrate on the 6 cognitive biases you have here. So no brand strategy and no pricing strategy. All right. So let's start one by one, and I'll give you a few examples about them. So the first one is the power of free. Free, obviously, is interesting for everybody. And I have a few examples of people, of brands that are using the power of free into their communication. So I don't know if you know Carglass, but it's a very heavy TV spender that are in the market in EMEA. And what I've seen in their communication is sometimes they give for free an amazing product like this Karcher tool to clean your windshield. And sometimes the gift is also even bigger than the services that is offered. And that's really interesting to see how they use this cognitive bias to actually appeal people for their services that is pretty basic, just changing the windshield, which is not so fun and so appealing. So very interesting to see that application. Second one is social norms. I think you know that pretty well. We usually adopt the opinions and follow the behavior of the majority. And clearly, when you will buy your new jacuzzi for this summer, you want to be better guided through your pages. And when you see La Redoute, which is a French e-commerce page versus like Google Shopping, for example, you can see that the first experience you have on one or another pages is sometimes you have direct access to those comments from the past buyers or not. And it could actually help the brands and the platform to simplify the purchase funnel. If you see it straight away, maybe it will be much easier to make a decision at first than having to click on the jacuzzi and then realize that you don't have a lot of like consumer feedbacks or comments, and then you would say, oh, maybe I have to come back and search for something that have better comments. So it's also a big recommendation for e-commerce websites to adapt and give the right information at the right time so you can better guide consumers. The next one is authority bias. That's really interesting because we also tend to follow the lead of credible and knowledgeable experts. So here, again, I'm sorry for non-French speakers, but you will understand what it is. But it's basically the typical things you have for like elected brand of the year or elected product of the year, and you have that stamp that gives confidence and trust to consumers, like, oh, this is an entity and an authority that I trust, so it might be a good product. That's also very useful for brands to use that. But when you don't have this kind of authority, you can also rely on influencer, which this is not so new, but quite new for marketers to rely more and more on influencers. And that's also very powerful to tackle this authority bias, using big influencers to support you and bring confidence and trust to customers. The fourth one is the power of now. There's no time like the present, and retailers are using that a lot, mostly when they use their digital catalogs to create this like urgency sentiment, because product and promotion are only available for a specific time. But you can also sense that feeling of urgency through the delivery options. And that's also one of the biggest, let's say, thing playing with in the simulations. Delivery is very important, and if you can have your product in 24 hours versus 48 hours or 3 days, it's highly probable that you will choose the product that has the fastest delivery. Fifth one is category heuristic. Because we rely on shortcuts or rules of thumb to help us to make quick and easy decisions. And that's actually, for me, the one I like the most, because it shows that online purchase decisions are also guided or influenced by your product. And that's not something you can make up. You have to choose what are the key specificities, the key specific points you want to share with your potential clients to talk about your product. So you have Dyson, that is a really high level product, and they actually share very specific information for their target audience. It won't talk to everybody, but it will talk to the people that are looking for high technology products. The same for Samsung, how they sell their TV, their frame TV. They actually don't talk a lot about the quality and the 4D and the pixel and stuff like that. They mostly talk about the decoration side of their product, and that talks to a specific audience, and that's how they will also guide some people through the purchase funnel, giving the right information to appeal them and say, hey, we have the right product for you. And last but not least, you have the scarcity bias, because scarce resources are more desirable. And that's very interesting because we've seen that, when you buy a plane ticket, where we used to buy a plane ticket, or at least when you try to book a hotel, it tells you 2 left rooms, and you have that feeling like, oh, I'm going to miss something here. I have to buy it. But actually, some companies are using that a lot in their communication. Now, that's really interesting to understand that not only in the online purchase decisions, but also in a piece of communications or in a strategy. Some brands like Lidl are using that, and that's very strong how they are able to highlight very good product in a very short time period, where they say, okay, we have 500 products available for you guys, and come to our shop and buy it, because then, you won't be able to afford it. So that's really creates this sometimes craziness around the product. And last example I really like also, and that's a classic one, that's Tesla. That's really incredible how scarcity became a strategy for Tesla, because they're already claiming that they will only build a certain amount of cars. And people never saw it. They don't have the car, they cannot try it, they cannot test it, and it's really disruptive how they use the scarcity to appeal people. Obviously, they have strong category heuristic behind, but it's really part of their business plan to create that sentiment of, I need it, and there are few products available, so I have to be first, and I have to jump on that opportunity. It's very interesting to see those pieces of communication, right? So now, what we are talking about. You've heard about the model, the philosophy of it, and you've seen the 6 cognitive biases we're going to talk about more. I wanted to give you a sense of what we've done in the world with decoding decision and with that messy middle. So it all started in the UK like 2 or 3 years ago, and we have now like 10 countries with local insight on the messy middle. So I will talk a lot about France, but you will see you can have access to other countries that are listed here. And what's interesting is that we use Sync with Google as a platform to share, research piece from Google. And the article of Decoding Decision on Sync with Google was actually the article most read of all time globally at Google. So it's really amazing that it's coming from UK and EMEA, but that we had so many interest on that topic, and we were actually quite excited about that. And the cool thing from behavioral science is that even if culture differs from one to another country, the human brains remains very similar, and the impact of those 6 biases on purchasing decision is usually very similar from one country to another. So what I will tell you today about the French categories, you can actually apply it for some countries, but you will see that all the insight I'm sharing is not something that you can like specifically apply, but actually you have to think about how you will take that for your brand and your strategy, and how you can reuse that for your communication. So I won't give you like very strict step-by-step communication orientation, but just keep in mind what you have to think about when you do a communication strategy. So what does that mean for France? First, we've took the opportunity to ask different things to our consumers when we've done that research, and we saw that 58% of consumers are not very happy about their online shopping experience, and it might mean that there's a problem here, and that we need to help to improve that. We still have more or less 50% of the people that are comfortable with their purchase experience, which is also a great news. So that's a first piece. Then we were able to weight the impact of each cognitive biases. And that's the first question we have for you. So I will go on the quiz, and I want to ask you what you think, which is the most impactful cognitive biases we've used. What is the most impactful, and what is the one who influences the most the purchasing decisions? So I will start now the quiz, and please try to answer the questions. I will give you 20 seconds to answer that. And that's over. Thanks a lot for your answers, and I can see that social norms won, and you are right. So congratulations to the one who answered the question well. I will show you the answer on the next slide. So yes, social norms are dominating the cognitive bias impact. But take a look at the second one, which is quite interesting, because brand impact also, and thanks God, is also appearing here. The power of brand was not included into our choices of cognitive biases, but we managed to identify its role across our conjoint analysis, and it's actually the second most important influencer. That is quite great, and it was really important also to share that with our client and brands, is that branding is still important. It's not just because you have the cognitive bias right, but branding will be, and that you have all things right. Branding is very important. And that's something we can observe across the different categories we've analyzed in France. And you can see that sometimes brand power is impacting the choices of consumers from 10 to 25%. So it means that from 75 to 90%, the rest of the influence is done by the 6 levels we've talked about. So it's great to see the gap between the different categories. We won't deep dive into why it's different from here and there, but you can obviously have your own interpretation about it, but it's interesting to see the differences by categories. I will speed up a little bit so you can see the simulation process. So let's have fun now, and you know, fun in research can be seen in very different ways, but we will deep dive on one specific category so you can understand the process of simulation, which is actually very interesting. So this is a shampoo simulation, or shampoing in French. I see that I've left the French one. So that's the material we've used to realize our simulation, whether it's on desktop or mobile. We've tried to expose people to an online shopping environment, including visually our 6 cognitive biases on the shampoo category. So first thing, we've asked them the first thing we have then is what is their favorite brand. So we started with 100% at this first step because we take into account like everyone has chosen his or her preferred brand at this stage. But what happens when the preferred brand is not the only one on the scene? What if the number one brand is exposed to the second preferred brand with the exact similar cognitive biases at the same level? That's where it starts to be very interesting, because that's what we call mirror exposure. We can realize that 40% of users are actually switching to the second brand, while this one has exactly the same argument than the preferred one. And this is what we call the mirror exposure. That's why being present and visible along the whole purchase funnel is key. Okay? So very interesting first insight. So now let's play a little bit more with our levels of influence. And let's start with the two most important ones for the shampoo category, which are category heuristic and social norms. What happens when we start to boost the second brand with those two factors while we keep the preferred brand at an average level? So some options are quite intuitive. So here for social norms, we kept the first choice brand average and we supercharged the second choice brand with more stars. And for category heuristic, it's a bit less intuitive, and those options are coming from our qualitative approach. And here we can see differences between nourishing shampoo and animal cruelty-free. And so for the second brand choice, it's more important than the nourishing fact for the first choice brand. So what happened when we expose consumer to that? We have, and that's quite overwhelming, that 69% of the consumer are switching to the second preferred brand. How crazy is that? Only two factors have changed, and boom, you know, more than 2/3 are changing to their are changing their mind. And that's really interesting to get that. So if you look at a search example and you have like two brands here, so I'm searching for curly hair shampoo here. That's French, but you get the point. We have two brands. My preferred brand might be the second one, the first one, sorry, the Juste brand, and Horace might be the second one. And you can see that every brand is playing with category heuristics, social norms. They talk about how good are their product, they're 100% natural. And you can easily imagine that if your first brand is not highlighting those two cognitive bias, and the second choice brand is showing that better, you might think, oh, I'm going to take a look at the second brand, and that might end by a purchase. So that's why you have to be careful about that. Then we took the simulation to a whole another level, that we decided to supercharge the second brand with all 4 missing cognitive bias. So you have the authority bias, then we've chosen 2 different authority bias, where Elle, the famous magazine, is actually stronger than the other one. We have the power of free with free air conditioner versus free delivery. Power of now, 1-day delivery versus 3 days delivery, and scarcity, almost out of stock versus limited edition. So obviously, it's a quite extreme scenario we are designing here, but that's what is interesting to play with, you know, with extremes when you do lab tests. So what do we have as a result? We can see that when second brand is supercharged, incremental impact of the 4 additional cognitive bias is less significant, but it's still important, and we have 77% of potential clients that are switching. This is quite scary if you are the brand number one, right? So let's be gentle also with the first choice brand, because we are here pushing the simulation to the extreme. We keep that first brand with average cognitive bias, and we really supercharge the second one. So here, as an example, you can see on search also how the different brands are able to highlight additional cognitive bias to actually better guide and better orientate the consumer's choice. I won't give too many details on that one, because the next one is even more interesting, because we are crazy, you know, in the world of research, and what we've tried to do something even funnier, and we went crazy. We invented a fake brand from scratch. So we've used, you know, the different how do you call that, like standard typo and naming, and we've created a brand from scratch. And what we've done is that we've supercharged this fake brand, a brand that nobody heard about before. And we supercharged it and we compared it to the first choice brand, which is still at an average level. So here's my second question and the second quiz. Let me try to activate it. Let me see. Okay, that's where it is. Fake brand, 30 seconds. Are you ready? Please tell me how much percentage of people will switch from their first choice brand to the fake brand that is supercharged. Go right now. Is it 46%, 62%, or 73%? All right, so you're telling me 73%. That's quite interesting. But this is not the right answer. The right answer is 46%. This is actually a good hope for brands that are existing. It's not so easy to move the needle here, but it's still quite crazy to see that almost 50% of the people that had never heard about a brand 5 minutes before, only with the 6 cognitive biases we've used, are able to switch their purchase or their intentions to buy. And we've done that not only with shampoo, but also with car insurance, hotels, cars, computers, and this is really amazing to see the differences between all the categories. So it really demonstrates the power of those cognitive biases, and if you use it well, it could be very powerful. So that's actually part of my conclusions here. I will go straight away on the first conclusion, not to lose too much time and to leave time for questions. So the first conclusion is that you need to ensure the brand presence. As I said, simply showing up can impact customer decision making when they are exploring and evaluating. So I gave you here, and I won't spend too much time, but then the example we had across the different French categories. And like shampoo, you know, the blue one is the first choice, and the yellow one is how people are switching to the second supercharged brand. And you can see, like, from garden furniture to vacuum cleaner, you have big differences on how people are actually switching directly to the second choice if you are using well the 6 cognitive bias. Second conclusion is that you have to intelligently and responsibly employ behavioral science principle. Yes, that's an important topic because you cannot do fake things. You cannot do a bad use of that. It's actually, you know, the comments you have on pages, the category heuristic, you cannot lie about it. It's because you have the good experience and the good product that you will be able to highlight that for your clients, and that's quite important here to highlight that you have to do a good use of this. All right. So here you can see also the difference from when you supercharge with the 6. The first example was only with the 2 first cognitive bias. This one, the simulation on the whole categories we've analyzed, is super boosting the 6 cognitive biases, and you see how strong from TV to dating, how things are changing a little bit, and how people could definitely switch to the second brand. And the last one, the most interesting one, is that you need to close the gap between trigger and purchase, and we need to better help clients to navigate into that messy middle. And you can see that if you are a challenger brand and even or a fake brand and you use it well, you can actually find your place and have a great share of market into some specific categories, and you see some differences here. So you can obviously see that for some categories, a fake brand, even in TV, you can actually make people be interested in a new TV brand, even if they never heard about it, if you use well those cognitive biases. So very interesting. And at the end, you can have different conclusion whether you are established brands or whether you are challenging brand. If you are established brand, actually, you can lose a lot of your brand investment if you don't use well cognitive bias, and you can lose some clients. So you need to focus a lot on this topic to ensure that you keep your clients and you constantly find additional clients. And for challenger brands, it's a great opportunity, actually, it's a massive opportunity to build on brand and win new customer in this space. This is where you can build a real and truly disruptive competitive edge, so very interesting for both sides of the picture, whether you establish brand or a challenger brand. And very briefly, what's next for us as researchers? We will explore the exposure side. So we will use, again, the behavioral science eye on that topic to deep dive into the exposure step, and also into the experience stage, because we've managed to unlock somehow the messy middle, but we still need to unlock what's happening behind exposure or what's happening between experience. So stay tuned. You will soon have some hopefully interesting insight from us in 2022 about the first step and the last step. That's all for me today. I hope it wasn't too fast and explicit enough, and I will be now happy to answer your questions.
Well, thanks a lot, Baptiste. That was really interesting. Before I go into the questions, and I'll share some of the questions that were shared, just maybe a quick thought. What I realized when listening to your story was that, when we are talking about branding, there's this whole industry that was created around this intangible thing called branding, and most of it is a bit of a pseudoscience. And what I realized when looking at your talk was that branding is just one of the influence levers, as you quite eloquently said, and other behavioral science principles could be as powerful influence levers as the reputation and the popularity of a brand. I think if you dissect how brands work, what indeed the work of Byron Sharp points at,
yes,
is that the effect of branding is actually could be the fact that people feel that because it's popular, it must be good. So there's a bit of social proof and authority already packed into it. But the more interesting thing is it's just one of the several levers that you can apply, which is very promising for challenger brand who can't rely really on the power of a build-up brand. You don't have the money, you don't have the capital, which I think is exciting.
I think that's an interesting point, because what we see here is a little bit of short-termism vision, right? Like if you're a challenger brand or a new brand, you can go challenge the strongest one if you find the key assets and the key communication pieces and you use well the behavioral science for that. But then the big question is, how do you build a brand on the long term? And that's where it's not so easy. And yes, brand is only a piece of that. But then if you want to last for long, then you will have to invest on branding, and you will have to build something stronger than just using cognitive biases to unlock, the messy middle across the purchase funnel.
It actually adds to the credibility of this presentation by deliberately not saying that branding doesn't work or isn't relevant. I think it really finds a great balance. So let me delve into a couple of questions. Jasper Fritsche asked, how could you apply this model to services instead of products? Do you see differences in applying the model to products, platforms, services?
So in services, I'm not entirely sure we've used it so far. What could it be in terms of services? So first, also, we are also exploring the B2B side of decoding decision. With it, it's a total different world, and it's work in progress. So maybe it's related also to the services question you have here, we think that product is different than B2B. And that's also why we didn't include in that research so far the retailers and the marketplaces, because we really wanted to focus on the product side. And we think that platforms where they play against each other or compete against each other do appeal to those cognitive biases, but it's also something different and something deeper that we need to analyze to make sure we understand well what's happening there. So for now, we don't have additional information about all that topic, but around this model of decoding decisions, you have many links to do with different aspects of e-commerce, and hopefully we will keep building new researches based on that starting point. So we might answer that in next year, a couple of years, hopefully.
Well, then you have to come back to share that story again.
Yeah,
that's a question from Saskia Auda-Amenkov. Is there a difference in the effect of the bias factors when the original brand is more an emotional brand like perfume versus a functional brand like shampoo?
So for now, we are still in a moment where we are collecting the different category results from each countries. And the first step was to see if there were some big differences between, the size of the impact, the size of the switchers from one step to another. And if by category, if shampoo was quite similar in France than in United States or Japan, and we saw very similar things. But what is missing right now is to actually compare all categories and try to understand why shampoo will be different than cars. And this is not part of this research because this was not the objective. But we are trying to unlock that and try to understand more. And actually, we are having those discussions with clients. Why you have more switchers at this step than for example, car insurance or anything that totally different from cars. And maybe the emotional and the functional piece has some things to see with that. But for now, we don't have the full answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Saskia.
And Nijat asks, have you noticed any differences between countries? And I would say an extra question would be, can we actually, observe or download the paper to see those differences?
So for now, we only have the white paper available with the methodology and the philosophy behind, but the results are being published through like dedicated event, like we've done an event with Google, which is called Think Insurance, and we presented the insurance, car insurance results, for example. So along the year, we will publish more results. But for now, we're not like sharing everything because we want to be cautious on how things are interpreted. It's very important not to just take that and say, okay, branding is useless. We need to focus on those 6 points and they will have a good business plan. It's not just like this. So we are being very careful. But one thing that is interesting is that first, on the UK step, they didn't have questions about branding, so we were missing the piece of branding. So now we have it with when we started to do it in the US and in France, we were actually from the first country to do it after UK. We were able to include that analysis on brand, and that was very powerful to actually understand better where brand loyalty and brand equity was in that space. But also, I don't know if you saw, but on the different biases we have, there's one I didn't explain because we discovered it afterward, is the affect, what the agency called affect. Because mostly for France, they realized that, we put a little picture on each options. And they realized that the picture that had a human on the picture versus the one who had only a product had better results and better switchers. And that's what they call affect. And that was very interesting to understand that, like actually in France, but not in other countries, this little picture was actually influencing for some categories much more the choice of the consumer than others. So you could actually link that to maybe emotional or cultural mindset for some specific categories. And I don't have all the behavioral sciences explanation behind, but it was very interesting to see that. So we have few differences by countries, but it's not so drastic, I would say. And the top 3 cognitive biases are almost the same by countries.
So social proof, authority, scarcity,
Exactly.
power of three.
Uh-huh.
I think indeed it's more the principle of supercharge. I really like this concept. You can supercharge the way you present a choice to people through behavioral science, and by doing that, you can actually get people to choose a brand in favor of a brand that is popular. You can get them to choose an unknown brand. That's, I think, really the power of this story.
And that's important because, and that's why also I highlighted it, is that, you know, playing with those six factors is not something that is so easy, because the authority bias, you cannot have it if your product is not so good. The same for the comments, the social norms. It's not something, well, we know that people are trained to trick a little bit on that, but at the end, it all depends on you. It all depends on your product, on the services you give, on the services you give after also. All that is hard to build, and you cannot just choose to supercharge your brand because you're new and you say, okay, I'm going to put 6 stars here. It's not your choice of having 6 stars. It's based on the consumer experience, for example. So you can play with it the way you want for some bias, but for other ones, that's something you acquire based on the good product you have and the good client services, the good client service you'll have.
Wow. Thanks a lot. I think, as I said in the beginning, I really think that the research that you're about to going to present was explosive, and I hope that every one of you shares this opinion with me. This could be so powerful if we make use of those principles in trying to challenge the big brands in the way that we try to get people to choose for challenger brands. I think that with brands and startups with a much lower budget, this is a very, very promising story. So thanks again, Baptiste, for this amazing story. To everyone who's still here, we're going to share the slides next week. We're going to share the video next week. And with this, unfortunately, we're at the end of Behavioral Design Week. I want to really do a big thank for Julia behind the screens, who did an amazing job. Quickly say hi, Julia, and in the front screen. Put yourself on the camera, say hi to everyone. She did an amazing job behind the screens in basically organizing and producing this event, and I want to thank her wholeheartedly for doing this smoothly, even in moments of crisis. She kept her cool and solved things. So thanks a lot. And for those of you who attended multiple sessions, I really hope you enjoyed it. I really hope that it sparked your fascination and your excitement and curiosity about behavioral science and how we can actually do magical things with behavioral change, with behavioral science. Or as Baptiste said in his talk, it could help us to decode choices. And I would add to that, decode humans. And so watch this series. If you haven't delved deeper into it, please look at the website and do one of our fundamental courses. They're awesome, and they really give you a deep dive into behavioral science. If you've already done that, maybe you might consider the advanced course, in which we do a very thorough training in applying behavioral science yourself in a behavioral design sprint and become behavioral design lead at your organization. So without any further ado, I need to close down this talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. Bye, everyone.